Sitting with us, as Father Reed mentioned right before the break, Father James Martin. Thank you so much for being here, Father.
My pleasure. Good to be back.
And we're talking about his most recent book, Jesus, a Pilgrimage. And maybe if you could tell us a little bit about the process, Father. I know it was kind of a long process. It's a big book. There was a lot of material in there. But how did all that weigh out?
Well, I'd been thinking about writing a book on Jesus for a while. I'm a member of the Society of Jesus. He's the most important person in my life and your lives as well. And it didn't really come together until I did a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and it really gave structure to the book. So the book's a life of Christ. You go through Jesus' life. Each chapter has a little bit of pilgrimage narrative, a little bit of Bible study, and a little bit of spirituality. So for example, if you start off in Bethlehem, right? You have a little bit of what Bethlehem is like today. What does it look like? What do you find? Actually, some funny stories about me traveling there with a Jesuit friend. A little bit of the narratives of, for example, Luke and Matthew about what happened at the infancy of Jesus. And then spirituality. What does it mean for our lives today? So you follow Jesus through his life and, a little pilgrimage and Bible study and spirituality along the way.
Okay. Now, I understand that this book has made it to the New York Times bestseller list. So that means you brought Jesus to the New York Times bestseller list.
Well, me and Bill O'Reilly, because he was already on there. So you had Killing Jesus and Jesus. But yeah, I was happy. It was on the Times list for I think 3 or 4 weeks, and I was delighted. And I think it shows that there's a hunger for good books. I hope it's a good book on our Lord.
We were talking about pilgrimages earlier, but about living a pilgrimage too, and this book seems like it's a real living of a pilgrimage and taking it to another level.
Well, yeah, I mean, the book is a pilgrimage on a number of levels. There's the real life pilgrimage I took to the Holy Land, and I try to invite people into some fascinating facts about what Jesus' life was like, what the Holy Land is like when you see it. What does it look like to see the Sea of Galilee? There's Jesus' pilgrimage, as it were. I mean, Jesus is on a pilgrimage. His whole life is a pilgrimage to the resurrection. And then most importantly, there's our pilgrimage. We're all pilgrims. And the Holy Father has talked about this recently, all the way, as St. Catherine of Siena, whose feast day we celebrated a few days ago, said, all the way to heaven is heaven. So there's a couple different kinds of pilgrimages in the book.
When I was a kid growing up in my hometown of Swampscott, there on the coffee table in the living room was our family Bible, and there were beautiful pictures of the life of Jesus. And I remember those today as if it was yesterday. And what you've done here is you've painted some incredible pictures with words of our Lord, and the one that I would like to ask you about is Nazareth, the hidden life.
Yeah. Well, I was really intent on trying to paint a picture, as you say, of Jesus' life, the hidden life, the time between ages 12 and 30. People are so fascinated about that time because it's 18 years of his life. We know very little about it. But one of the things I point out is that we actually can know something about what life in first century Nazareth was like through archaeological studies and sociological studies. And you can kind of paint a portrait of what the houses looked like, what the roads were like, what a carpenter did at the time, what they ate, their diet, the way a woman would have worked in her house. And so using archaeological studies, I try to sort of invite people into that world. I find that part of Jesus' life fascinating as well, also because his ordinary life, working life, is a lot like our lives today.
What were some of the more prominent places for you in the Holy Land, or some of the places that struck you the most while you were there?
Well, I would say 3 places. First, the Sea of Galilee. I had no idea what to expect, and when you go there, it's a surprise that the Sea of Galilee is largely undeveloped. And so you can stand in Capernaum, where we know Jesus was, and look out and see the sea is exactly as it was at the time. Second, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where Jesus, his body was laid and he rose from the dead. I found that very moving. And then another place, the Pool of Bethesda, where he heals the paralyzed man. They had uncovered this pool, which archaeologists had thought had been lost just at the end of the 19th century. So to see it, just as the Gospel of John described, was really extraordinary.
We're grateful that you're here with us, Jim, for the live show today, but you have a few other tasks, and you've been around for a little while. Last night, I know you were the MC at the Jesuit Gala. It went very well.
Yeah, we raised $1.6 million, thank God.
Congratulations to that. And where do you go from here? I know you have a few other stops before going home.
Yeah, I'm going to Holy Cross for a bit to visit my brothers there, and then I'm also doing a benefit for the Sisters of St. Joseph in Springfield, in Holyoke at Mount Marie Center, where we hope to raise as much money as possible for those great women.
Great.
Now that you've been on a pilgrimage, you've written a book, any tips on people that are going over to the Holy Land? What are some ways that I think they can experience their pilgrimage a little bit better, or if you have any tips?
Well, my main tip is to give yourself time to pray. I think it's great to go on a tour, but sometimes the tours, you know, sometimes tend to rush you. And I think if you're going on a tour, make sure there's time to pray and relax and just meditate, because you don't want to go just from one place to another, because it's so powerful. You really need to take it in.
We were talking before the show about the power of social media, and I know you're very active in that. Your Twitter handle, I believe, is @JamesMartinSJ, and a lot of people follow you, and that's part of your ministry, isn't it?
Well, it has become part of my ministry. I have, as you say, the Twitter page, the Twitter feed and the Facebook page, and I've been amazed at the number of people who say that they, you know, look forward to evening meditations, and I do a gospel tweet every morning, and I realize that's where people are. And, you know, as Jesus went out to people and spoke to them in the medium of the parable, we can go out to people through the medium of Twitter and Facebook and meet them where they are. That's what God asks us to do.
Yeah.
You were talking earlier, too, about the Killing Jesus book by Bill O'Reilly and this Jesus a Pilgrimage, and the great response that they've gotten, too. And why do you think that's so now? Or are people getting more interested in Jesus' story?
I think he's naturally interesting.
Yeah.
I think people, even doubters and seekers, and I would say even agnostics and atheists, are interested in Jesus. And certainly for the believer, you can't, you know, get enough information about him. I think the difficulty is sorting out what's kind of sensationalistic and, you know, what's more sort of mainstream and based on scholarship. And what I try to do in the book is bring people into the most up-to-date scholarship and archaeology to help us know what we can know about Jesus, and also to talk to them about the Christ of faith, you know, the one who's risen and performs the miracles and who's alive in our daily life.
And speaking of all that, I got to thank you and your Jesuit brothers for giving us a great pope. I absolutely love the guy, but I've decided I know why I love him so much. I love the Jesus in the Pope, in Francis. So thank you for giving us to him. And do you think the Francis effect has anything to do with the popularity of something like Jesus a Pilgrimage?
Well, it might. I know that Jesuit inquiries to the Society of Jesus are up, for example. And I think that, you know, he is drawing people to Christ, which is, I think, the Pope's main job. And if he's helped the book, you know, all the better. But both of us, both Pope Francis and myself, are trying to bring people to Jesus.
Now, we have you know, talked about the pilgrimage as well as you know, going on a pilgrimage and taking something like this. How is it, you know, for somebody that is on a pilgrimage to sort of get into that, as you mentioned too, the Christ of faith as well as the Jesus of history, and how to sort of complement them while they're on there in a pilgrimage and sort of put it all together, you know?
Well, that's a good point. The Jesus of history is very much evident when you're on a pilgrimage, because you're in the actual places where he lived and preached and healed. The Christ of faith, I think it's important to remember that, you know, he's alive, you know, he's risen, and so he's with us through the Spirit, you know, as you're on the pilgrimage. But that's what I try to do in the book, combine these fascinating insights about the Jesus of history, what we can know, with, you know, the one who did the miracles and who's risen from the dead and who's with us. So I think the basic thing is to remember that Jesus is with you on that pilgrimage as you walk through the places where he trod.
This is going to be a great gift for Mother's Day, for Father's Day. I'm going to suggest that Jay give it to Ethan for his first communion, and he can pour over for a few years, maybe.
That's right.
But if people did want to get a copy of this, Jim, how would they go about that?
Yeah, it's available anywhere books are sold, online, and it's also available on audiobook. It's available Kindle, and any way you want it, it's gettable.
Perfect.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
My pleasure. Thank you.
Being here with us.